I'm Danielle Smith, guest hosting for Common Sense Calgary. We are interviewing the candidates for the municipal election this fall for Calgary City Council. And joining me now is your Ward 2 candidate, Jennifer Wyness. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so you've run once before, you're running again. What made you decide that you wanted to give another stab at it?
Why I ran the first time still hasn't been addressed. So we weren't getting the representation to meet the needs of Ward 2. And after incidents that have happened in the last term under our incumbent, they're definitely not getting met. Like when your elected official will not answer journalist questions, how can they bring the concerns of the community forward? And so that's why I'm coming back to say, like, I want to bring a voice forward, because we're still seeing the same issues of before when I ran in 2017, except now it's another 4 years.
So let's talk about the incumbent, Joe Maglioca. I think he is still intending to run again. Give me an idea of some of the decisions that he made in the last 4 years that you would have done differently.
Well, I wouldn't have lied about my expenses right out of the gates. I'm like, when you're an elected official, we're not playing with money that grows on trees. If we spend money, it's ultimately going to come from the taxpayer. And so we have to be very conscientious about what we do. I'm not going to upsize my plane ticket or get first class on the taxpayer dime. I think that's unethical. I don't think that's fair to everybody who's a hardworking Calgarian.
Now, you mentioned that there are issues in the ward that were unaddressed 4 years ago. They've gone still unaddressed in the last 4 years. Give me an idea of what those are. What are the top 3 issues in Ward 2?
Well, it's about service needs. We're not getting serviced here. We don't have public buildings, and that was sort of seen in the last election. Like Evanston is a massively growing community. We're now getting 2 new development communities, and we still don't have bus stops going through Nolan Hill, Evanston. They don't have public buildings where we can put community centers for voting. So like if you have to drive all the way to the big rec center, how is that? That's impacting your ability to even participate in democracy. You have, we don't have schools coming in, even though that is not necessarily just civic. It's partnering with all of levels of government, and that's not being heard at any level of government. So we keep getting houses, but we're not getting buses, we're not getting schools, we're not getting community centers. Those are just a few to start scratching the surface of what we need.
Why do you think that ward is so underserviced?
Our councillor doesn't want to voice our concerns. It's like even the fire, like when we were first debating on how many new communities to build, it was, oh, we don't need to worry about providing a fire hall when we approved the two new land development. However, on Friday, when we had that grass fire, it came really close to destroying homes. And so we had a very stretched fire department that was responding to the fire or grass fire north of our development, which was actually, it was a road that stopped it from jumping, and everyone was just praying because people had to be evacuated from their homes. So we had that grass fire, we had a grass fire out near Canmore or Cochrane, and then you also had a house fire in the northeast. So like when you're going to continue to approve the potential for home development and say, okay, this is going to be open, and yet we're not going to provide fire service for it, we really need to check what our growth is going to be. It has to be in line so that we keep everybody safe, those that we want to build for, and then those that we have built for.
Do you have an idea of how to resolve that? Because they did put a pause on the proposal for 10 new developments, just for the exact reason that you're talking about, that they didn't have the capacity to build and staff new fire halls. How do you build that into a community if it wasn't built in there in the first place? Do you have a solution?
Well, I think we can get creative with partnering with developers. Like there could be tax incentives for them helping to contribute to some of the infrastructure, because it is also easier to tag the initial costs of development onto the sale of a home, because when you amortize it over 25 years, rather than just making the taxpayer pay up front, it's not fair to the taxpayer when we have a potential financing solution.
Let's talk then more about development, because you've probably heard, because it's been in the news a lot over the last number of weeks, that the guidebook for community planning has come out, and it's been pretty controversial. Have you heard that it's been controversial in your area too?
It didn't really focus on our community needs. Like there are some cool things that could really help our community, like flexible zoning, because right now we're seeing big box stores shut down. And so now we have gaping holes in retail space. Why can't we start looking at ways to be flexible so that everybody wins? We get some, instead of having something that's empty, we have it filled with a business that's going to meet community needs. Because when we close London Drugs down, we're not going to get another London Drugs. It didn't work there, but maybe there could be a microbrewery or whatever the community wants to go into that space, because we're also building high density condominiums right across the street.
Were you not hearing from some of the R1 zone neighborhoods? Because you'd have a lot of R1 zoning, I would expect, up in that area. Are they concerned that there's going to be too much development and too much densification?
We were already discussing that beforehand, before that even hit the play, because like I said, we're being surrounded by new developments. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're like, our concern is, okay, yes, we know that we want to build up, we're building out the city. And we had, in 2017, we had Hawkwood Farms going in, we had Hampton's golf course getting developed. And we're like, we really want to say, let's step back, let's look at how we're actually developing our communities. Because even in Hamptons, like, that's part of the drainage. And when we're starting to just approve golf course development, forgetting that in the history of Calgary, it was an easy way to manage water movement throughout our communities. We're just going to say, okay, let's forget about that, but yeah, let's have development. No, we can't do it that way. We have to go, how do we meet the needs of what that community is asking for?
Let's talk about the target of what it is they're trying to achieve with the development plans. There's a real question of affordability.
Yeah.
And there's two ways you can approach it. You can keep building in greenfield development new single family homes so that the first time home buyer has access to an affordable home. You can also densify with multifamily homes with the notion that you might be able to offer more affordable housing that way. That seems to be the big discussion, is do you build out or do you build up? Where do you fall on that issue?
I think we really need to look at what attracts people to Calgary. So like, we're trying to solve Vancouver and Toronto problems in Calgary. We're a different city. We have different people coming here with different needs, different wants, different expectations. And so we built our downtown core off of oil and gas and commercial buildings. And then it was kind of, we had the people, but we didn't think about building what they needed at the time, because when we had the money to play with, we didn't play with it. We let people go into our downtown core and then go out to the suburbs. And so when we should have been building the accommodation at that time. So I kind of feel like we've moved forward in time, and now we have a rougher economy. We have COVID, coming out of COVID. What's our economy going to look like? We have an opportunity, yes, to shape what our city looks like, but then also we're trying to solve the problems of the past as if we're still living there.
Do you mind elaborating on that a bit more, saying that we're sort of trying to solve the Vancouver, Toronto problem, even though Calgary is different? What do you see as being the big difference between those two big cities and Calgary?
Well, Vancouver is very much not a family city. When you live there, you know you're already priced out of the real estate market, and to get in, it's like, it's $1 million investment. Even condos start at $500,000 for an entry level. Yeah. And then you got bidding wars going on currently in Vancouver and Toronto, where it's like the real estate agents are setting it up that it's like you put your offering on day one, and that's when you come in. Whereas Calgary, it's like you can look around, you can visualize where you want to live. If you want to be more urban centered, you can go live down to the urban. But if you have kids and families, you can go have a house, you can have the space, because not everybody wants to live in a condo. And even as families grow and expand, you don't want to put 2 kids in a condo. Like, if you look at Vancouver, there's strata problems where people with kids are getting threatened to get kicked out of a condo because the kids make too much noise. So if we're going to try and say our solution is to build condos and that's going to fix everyone's housing problem, we're not really looking at what a life cycle of someone is, of what their goals are or where they are in the stage of their life. Because there's a lot of first-time home buyers that when they were young were priced out, but now their first-time home is not going to be one to meet the needs of a single person. It's going to be meeting the needs of a family. So we need to have that variability.
It's a great point. And it is interesting because Calgary very much is a city that's been designed to commute downtown to work and then commute back home to the suburbs to live. And that model doesn't seem to be working anymore. So we've got at least 100 to 140,000 vacant spaces for employees downtown, with no real plan for how that's going to get filled. Do you have some thoughts on that? Like, do you feel like there's a business attraction strategy that will bring some of those businesses back downtown, or do you see a different approach?
Well, I think we do need to do business cluster planning, and we need to try and create like cool little districts, because I find like if I want to go to the opera, I'm going to Sate. That's not the downtown core. Normally you have a downtown opera like attraction where you would go to the opera, go to the restaurant before attending the event or the concert. And we don't look at, again, I keep going back to this, of how someone moves through the action of what they want to do. So in Vancouver, if you want to go to a concert, you're attracted to the downtown core, you go to the restaurant beforehand, and then you go to the event, and then you go to the suburbs back home or to a condo building that you live in. Because even then, when you look at Vancouver, you have to cross bridges and there's traffic dynamics and you got kits in different areas that people live in. And so with here, we have to start going, okay, well, are we going to make an art center in the downtown core where if you want to buy art, purchase art, experience performing arts, you go to that sort of section of the city. If you want to go to, like, we mastered kind of the hockey game and the Stampede, but we never really thought about how do we keep that entertainment going year round.
You talk on your site about different clusters. What other kind of business clusters could you envision?
Tech center, like we're trying to attract a tech cluster, but also what does the tech industry want? People that are coming here for tech, or if you look at the cities that have flourished, is they're active cities. They have pathways. They tend to want to ride a bike to and from work and be active because they do sit in front of a computer for so long. So it's like, who do we want to attract? Where are they currently? What does that city look like? What does that employee's typical day look like? And yet we're forgetting what Calgary offers, because we still, like Vancouver, we have amazing mountains. We have spectacular hiking, backcountry skiing. It's just a drive away. Like even in Vancouver to get to Whistler, we're pretty comparable commute between here and Banff. And so we have the opportunity to showcase this, but we're choosing not to. And I'm going to go to transit because we're shying away from transit opportunities because the park's getting full and we're still ignoring the transit needs of Calgary. But why not start thinking further than that? Let's meet Calgary's transit needs, and how can we connect it so that we can keep cars off the roads and get the most amount of people going back and forth between the mountains. It works in Europe. Like, we like to all go backpacking to Europe, where a lot of people outside of high school love to take off and do that, and even people all across the age spectrum. So what is it that attracts us to go travel somewhere? And why don't we try and create some of that? Because we want tourists to come in to our city and spend their money here and have an amazing experience, but we also want them to get around and not get lost sitting in traffic.
So give me an idea of what an appropriate tourist-friendly transit system would look like. And I'll use that as a transition to get into the Green Line, because the Green Line isn't really being designed with tourism in mind, but it's not even really serving either of the communities of the Deep South or the Deep North either. It's twice as much as it was originally envisioned. The transport minister says it doesn't interconnect with the current system, and he doesn't like the current proposal. So maybe you can bridge those two things. What would you do with the Green Line? And then how would you create a more user-friendly, tourist-friendly transit system?
Well, I think the Green Line is a bridge, or at least a step closer to my word. Like, everyone says it's a transit pathway to nowhere, but if we don't start building something in a direction north or south, like, even because we're thinking so small term, we're fighting about it's going nowhere, but not envisioning where it can go. And so we need to get transit going from the airport to the downtown core from the north. Like, if we think about it, if we keep drawing that straight line, we'll connect to Airdrie. So then that can keep people off the QE2 and get people coming in and out of our core. So, like, there's an opportunity if we keep thinking past there's no money. Right now, the Fed government is throwing money at infrastructure projects because we've just come through a really tough financial time, something we haven't really seen in 100 years, the pandemic. And so here is a prime opportunity to envision and get this funding. And again, it's taxpayer money. It's not like it just grew on trees. It's our money that we've invested coming back to us. And we have to decide where it goes. And if we say, we have no projects or no vision of where we want to take our city to, who's going to want to invest in us? If we're getting so caught up in fighting about, the Green Line, like, look, and from 2017, we've been fighting about this. And now, even recently, because of COVID, wood costs and wood inputs have gone up. So now we've already, by dragging our heels and fighting each other on it, we are now paying more. Whereas if we would have started in 2017 saying, let's just start getting shovels on the ground, we're not even going to get started until 2022.
Let
So
me ask you if you've got a solution for the north that might wash with what the transport minister wants to do, because I think he's made it pretty clear that the southern leg, I think most people agree, southern leg makes sense on its own, but it doesn't necessarily have to come all the way downtown. If you could have it end at, say, the Stampede station, that would, I think, satisfy his concern about it being interconnected with the system.
yeah.
And is there a leg that you could build from the north that doesn't necessarily have to connect? It doesn't necessarily have to be this massive, huge line from one end of the city to another. Is there some other proposal to serve the north that we haven't considered?
Well, I think as a transit rider, when we ride buses, we really want to create a system that does have north, south, east, west connectors and have it intersect. But we also have to think about how we move people through that downtown core. We don't really have covered transit wherever you go. So if you're a transit rider out in Ward 2, you're standing out in -30 waiting to catch a bus. So you kind of want to get to a C train stop where it's actually covered as fast as possible. And the unfortunate thing is the only really area where you get covered transit is when you ride a C train. And so, or heated, I should say, like sometimes there's a cover, but not necessarily everywhere. And so for Ward 2, we really we're still having a problem getting busing. So I look at it as I want to invest in C train lines, because that's like, you go to London, you're riding tubes. You're not thinking really about busing. Your whole goal of moving people through a major city is to get you to the tube using busing. So you're spending smaller times on that, which means you can make shorter bus routes. So it's just like running through communities out to the C train, and then you can move around the city a lot more freely.
So I'm hearing that you would keep with the green line the way it's originally been devised, but you'd work to leverage provincial and federal money to just build more of it faster. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. And I would like to step back and go, how do we want to make our connections of our whole platform transition? Because right now, you got your free zone and the downtown core, but it's not really like when I think of Vancouver Transit, you go to Waterfront Station and then you can switch from riding the SkyTrain to busing to the North Shore. And so they have a different challenge, and we don't really have that as part of our transit system. And again, we're trying to continue to piece together stuff that's been done in the past without thinking, how do we want to renovate our entire system to function to where we want to take our city?
Is it possible that our population is still too small to build the system out in the way that you're describing? Because some of the biggest cities in the world have just a much greater ridership of transit. And that's one of the issues, is now these projects are very expensive. And do we even have the people to support the system that you're thinking of?
Well, I kind of look at it as, where do I want to spend my money? Do I want to spend 2-3 hours riding transit, or I'm going to buy a junker car and pay for a higher insurance rate? I'd buy the car because I get more freedom and flexibility to get where I want to go quickly and effectively, because we do not have that transit system in place. So if we want to attract people to use our transit, we need to build it so that it's not more desirable to drive a car, that like a $500 car, and pay insurance, because the maintenance and cost of running that is just more of a headache for people, because of a lacking transit system. So if we build the transit system, we can attract more ridership, because it would be more desirable to do it. Because when you ride transit, I can read a book. I don't have to pay attention to the car in front of me.
Well, let me just throw a few more things on the table with you, so I can see how you prioritize transit compared to the other things in the capital budget. Because there were 4 big capital projects that were put forward and approved, incidentally, against the recommendation of the CFO, who said that there was only enough money to build one of them, not all 4. And one of them, of course, was the event center with the Calgary Flames. The other was the BMO Center expansion for the convention space, the Arts Common transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. So I guess I'm wondering, if we put it to you, where would you have spent the money? Would you have said, forget all of those and just double down on transit? Or does one of these projects stand out for you as an essential that needed to be built?
Let's unpack the arena deal. Like, when we were debating the arena deal in 2017, we had the Olympics on the table. And like right now with Calgary, we keep putting millions and millions of dollars to just back out of projects. And so and then now we've made it so that the taxpayers are funding the arena deal and backstopping the inflationary costs that are going to come with building that. And we're not fighting it as hard as we're fighting the Green Line. So I think we really need to start evaluating, who are we fighting for, whose needs matter more, and where do we actually want to have a conversation that's going to benefit everybody? Because even with an arena, we need transit. Because you build an arena, you still need to get people, and the arena doesn't just serve Calgary, it serves all of southern Alberta, because people will come from Red Deer, Medicine Hat to come watch hockey games. And so you need to move those vehicles in and out of your city. You need to move people to and from the game in a safe, effective manner. So some people will choose to ride transit to a hockey game, but then fight the Green Line. So you're like, what? Let's start having a longer conversation about it, because I find when we discuss this, we're discussing segments without engaging in the communities. And like, for me, I'm kind of looking at from Ward 2 needs, and I'm like, let's just get it closer because we're hungry for transit here. Mm-hmm. And so if I were elected, I would have to start talking to every other ward and community and engaging with Calgarians and having a frank conversation about what they want and what they're going to use and how they're going to use transit. Because I also look at, like, when I was down in like central Mexico, they have a colectivo system. And I talked about this in 2017 about how I can get from 30 kilometers or 30 miles outside of town, stand by the highway across from the marina and get into town. And then sometimes the bus driver will sidetrack and take us through the little farming communities there and drop people off. I'm like, the fact that Mexico has, in some senses, I found, a more effective transit system than Calgary. We really need to start looking at how we build projects and how we want people to come to event centers and leave event centers.
I take your point. I guess I'm just wondering still about where the money comes from, because if the Green Line is going to be 5.5 billion and it's only halfway built, I guess I'd have to assume there's another $5 billion that are going to be needed to build the rest of the line out. And these other projects we're talking about, it's hundreds of millions. So there's sort of a difference in scale. Where do you think the money comes from for the kind of transit system you want to see? It just, I'm not sure that we can rely on federal and provincial grants in the way that we did in the past. How do you see it?
I do think we need to prioritize transit. Like, we keep putting it off. If we wouldn't have put it off like time and time again, we wouldn't be in the spot we are now. And if you want to build all these other projects, you need to have transit going to and from them. So like I say, we need to step back, look at where we want to put the different major attraction centers in our city, and make sure our transit will get people to and from those cities. So it's kind of like, I want our transit prioritized, but I also want us to make sure we have a better overall plan of where we're putting stuff, because I don't want 20, 30 years down the road, all the young kids that are still in school go, what the heck were they thinking at that time when they made this decision? And I think there's a lot of people that will go, what the heck were they thinking from the decisions that were made 30 years ago? So I want us to take a quick pause, really methodically have and that was part of the guidebook. There wasn't engagement from our counselors. And so like Ward 2, our counselor's not talking to us because he doesn't want to answer the tough questions about why did you spend our tax dollars the way you spent them? Right. So we need to have more town halls. We need to just do like this kind of a reset, because we do know that we are coming out of COVID where there will be an influx of funds, and we got to go, okay, what are our priorities? What is this community priorities? What has been neglected for such a long time? Because yes, I do understand my ward is very much a car-driven ward, but there are a lot of people that I've been door knocking. They said, we need a bus.
Let's talk then we've talked a lot about the capital side. Let's talk about the operating side of the budget. So when you look at operating expenses, do you think the city is spending the right amount, or too much, or too little?
I think there's always a way to find savings. There is, back in my university days, there's an article, I was going to pull it before this interview, but they talked about how a company saved millions of dollars by simply saving paper clips. And that really stuck with me, because there are ways for us to find savings. And you look at our spend it or lose it budgeting idea, there's a lot of spending that happens towards the end of budgeting that I guarantee didn't need to happen, because they want to make sure that they get that same budget next time. And yet we're not being flexible in our needs. And I know I'm not an accountant, but I do think there's a better way to do it, because every person that runs their home has to reallocate funds in different manners to make sure that they can pay their bills. So I think city council needs to start thinking more about where are we putting our funds and how can we reallocating, like, because we were never guaranteed a massive snow year time and time again. And in some senses, our snow strategy is let it melt. And then other years we have massive where we really do need to deploy people out there to move snow so that people can get around safely. So it's how do we make sure that if one budget or one department isn't having a hard financial year, or they don't have mass expenditures, there's no pipes bursting in buildings, can we put some of the savings that were allocated for those emergencies to cover a snow budget and just get a bit more creative? Like we're definitely more technology driven. So can we cut down on some of the paper products we're buying? I'm talking small stuff. Like sometimes we focus too much on the big action and not enough on what little things that add up over time that can be done. And it's hard too for me as a candidate coming not as an incumbent, because I don't get the inside scoop on some of the things that if I were to walk in there and I'm like, why are you guys doing it that way? Can't we do it this way? Or is there a better savings? Because again, I'm not on the inside. I don't get that full 360 of what's currently going on. And so
you do have an idea though about allowing, instead of having that year-end blowout, got to get rid of the budget or it's going to get cut next year, allowing for some of that to carry over. I think you said somewhere between 50 and 75%. How do you think that would change the dynamic if a department was allowed to keep a percentage of their leftover?
It would change their mindset. They would be about, do I actually need to spend the money here? Or am I just spending it because I need to keep this budget line? It makes you more aware of what your habits are, because you go into a workplace, and again, the longer you are there, you kind of become numb to what decisions you're making, because that's the way it's always been done. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we got to stop being that's the way it's always been done and go, how can we be more creative? If we are, it took a pandemic to do it, but somehow we adapted and were able to all work from home and make changes, and companies were able to adapt and still continue to, the wheels didn't fly off the bus completely. People are still making money. So let's not take another pandemic to go, how can we make City Hall function better?
Talk to me a bit about how you see the wage issue, because wages are one of the biggest ticket items on the operating side. Do you have any thoughts on how wage increases or benefits or pensions, how any of that can be moderated?
The pension talk's an interesting one. Like I read a common sensus approach, and there are some interesting points to it. But I also think we need to go, pensions are a value that society needs to have because it's for retirement. And you look at major corporations going bankrupt and pensions getting lost by people who have worked in companies for 20, 30 years. It always ends up being the taxpayer that backstops the pension, because we're all going to retire. We're all going to get old one day. And the unfortunate trend has been that most people are not expecting a pension. And I think that's where we start to see the problem is I don't get a pension. My company hasn't given me one, or I haven't, but yet it's an earned pension. Although we can talk about the 2-to-1 breakdown later, we need to start putting pressure on everyone to create a pension plan of all companies, because it can't just be the taxpayer backstopping, whether it come from City Hall being backstopped by the taxpayer, but even then, like Sears is being backstopped by the taxpayer because they're going to end up on social programs. So it's either way we look at it, there's going to be a backstop by the taxpayer. So let's try and encourage that companies provide pensions.
Okay, let me switch away from public service to talking about council members themselves, because there was a council member who's now running for mayor, Jeremy Farkas, who took quite a bit of effort to try to reduce the pay for council members, eliminate the transition allowance. He chose not to take the pension himself. Do you think council members are paid appropriately, or do you think that there can be some austerity there?
I think we need to go to a third party arbitrate, anyone who can control their wage is obviously not going to be the right person for the job. You're not coming at it in an unbiased way. Yeah, like they're paid, they're compensated. We have to balance the fact that if you are not compensated well, who's going to fund you? Because you have to make sure that you can't be bribed. And we see that in banana republics, that there's a lot of bribery going on, and it's because there's no checks and balances. And as long as we make sure we have a third party that can come in and check and balance whoever's elected to office, that's how we can make sure we don't end up like a banana republic. It's about ensuring that we keep compensation going up with inflation, because everybody who works knows that our grocery bills are going up, our hydro bills are going up, but our wages aren't. And so it's less, I think this conversation is really less about city council and more about the fact that compensation across the board for a working Calgarian or working Canadian has not gone up. I read somewhere that if minimum wage rose with inflation, it would be something like $40 an hour. Now you let that sink in for a second and you go, like, look at the cost of rent. Look at your hydro bill. If someone's making minimum wage, they're working 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs just to get by. What kind of quality of life is that? What kind of standard of living are we forcing on people? We need to have a conversation that goes further than just city council. And I guarantee you, when oil and gas was booming and people were making quality living wages where they could support a middle class living and take vacations and not worry or stress about paying the bills, this wasn't something we were worrying about.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
It's only because people aren't making living wages and they're worried. Some people are going from 2 family incomes down to 1. And the stress that puts on a home is why this has become even more a hot topic.
It's very true. Now, so here's, I guess, the other side of it, with people feeling the pinch, but they also want services, but they don't want their taxes to go up either. So tell me, we haven't talked about taxes yet. So tell me what you're hearing from the residents in your ward about how they're feeling about the current level of taxes and the way taxes have gone up in the last 10 years.
Well, I think some of us are feeling quite duped at the doors because we had a council that promised our taxes weren't going to go up. That was one of his big pitches to us. And he goes and spends like a drunken sailor, and our taxes, we're seeing them go up. And so it's because he was, the way I look at it is campaign expenses sort of dictate how someone's going to spend in City Hall. And so I ran a lean campaign. It was under $6,000, and I almost knocked the incumbent out of his seat. And he spent, what was it, $343,000.
Holy.
So you go under 6,000 versus $343,000. That's like, first of all, that's not even a fair fight. But to almost beat him spending that much money, it really makes you question, where was all that money going? And how his solution when push came to shove was to throw money at it. And so we really need to start looking at getting people who can manage a campaign budget effectively and efficiently against people who have just been spending like unchecked for so long.
So give me your sense of how taxes should be set, because I think at the moment we see spending budgets set, and then the tax rate is set to generate enough revenue for it. And it's part of the reason why taxes keep on going up. Are you fine with that kind of approach, or do you think there needs to be a tax cut? Do you think the taxes should go up? Do you think they should stay where they are?
I'd like to see them maintained. I think we really need to take a look, because it's a double-edged sword, because it's off of the value of your house. So if people see our houses as desirable purchases, they're going to spend more money for it. But then the unfortunate side of that is we pay more in taxes. But we're also still attracting people to come to our city to buy our houses. So it's that vicious cycle of how do we fix it without damaging what's working. And so it's again, it kind of ties into, we need to make sure we have good quality jobs for people to come here and work, to afford the houses that we have and to pay the taxes that we currently are charging. But go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what about non-residential taxes for the business community? Do you think those are set at about the right level?
I think we really, like, when we look at non-residential taxes, we have to look at, and I haven't really heard anyone talk about this lately, is when the first sort of round of layoffs from oil and gas started happening, there was a few articles that popped up, is that people started working from out of their home on small businesses. And so what we've seen is, and why we have such vacancy, is that because it became more affordable to get a startup going out of your home and manage it that way, because it's expensive to get going, first of all, and it takes a while to get caught on. And we also have social media marketing, and there's lots of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we need to really start doing is finding ways to take the vacant commercial land and get the people out of their houses so that we can start having more of a balanced tax break. Because right now, because they're empty, then we have to sort of put the burden back onto the homeowner. And so it's like, as long as we keep this cycle going back and forth where commercial land's empty, the homeowner has to backstop it. Well, let's try and get some of the people back in the commercial so that we can start putting some taxes back there, but also make sure that the companies that are going there are flourishing. Like if I want to go downtown and support a downtown business, the parking rates are astronomical. Like that you have all of Calgary built out, and yet all these people with money to spend not going downtown, because why would I want to spend on parking when I can put that money into a small business? So maybe make it $2 a day for a little bit. Ease the cost of parking so that we can go and spend in businesses and then start getting people back in those buildings, and then we can put sort of evenly disperse some of the taxes.
Talk to me about new taxation powers, because it keeps coming up every so often when we talk about a charter for the city or the report that came out last year. There's also a report from years ago put forward by the municipal associations suggesting that the way you diversify away from property taxes is you develop new tax sources. Do you support that?
I think the way I look at it is taxes are always, we're always turning to taxes to try and keep cities going, but really it comes down to keeping an economy functioning, because it's only now that we're in a desperate place that we're grabbing at straws. So let's stop grabbing at straws and try and build a functional city where people can come live, work, play, and afford. And until we stop taking and just focusing on this tax rate or that tax rate, it doesn't matter what we're going to do. We're all going to get mad at whatever we switch to. Just give it time and give it a history cycle, because it's not really solving the root cause of it, because we're just trying to find ways to get more blood from the stone rather than finding more efficient ways to run things.
Well, if there was, I like your business cluster idea. So that's sort of one way that you can think of attracting new businesses. One of the other ways the city has tried is by offering actual cash incentives. So the $100 million fund that was put aside with the Calgary Economic Development to attract new businesses with subsidies. Do you support that kind of approach?
I think we do need to help with the startup business. Like you look at the pandemic, the little man who's trying to do a small business is getting burned the worst. Like we kept Walmart open, we kept Costco open, but we told the small business owner to shut down. So we do need to help them stay afloat, so that as we can release and get back to our new exciting social lives, that they can be there for us to go visit and to go engage with. And so if we don't try and find ways to get people started, because startup costs are hard. That's why we need to attract angel investors and angel funds, so that we can get people to invest in small businesses and for the market to determine it. Like we saw that in some senses when CERB went out, that trickle down economics didn't work. It was you put money in the hands of the people, they will make sure that the businesses keep going, because they use their dollars to determine who's going to best meet their needs. And it also allows people to get creative to see, okay, there's a market need out of the investment with this company, or this lack in market allows someone to step into it and become successful and independent.
All right, let's talk about something you mentioned earlier, snow removal. I think you said we have a wait till it melts kind of strategy on snow removal. Is there a better approach that you think can be taken? Are you hearing about it from constituents?
Well, I think there are definitely areas, especially areas with hills, where they do need help. Like you can't depend on your neighbors to shove your car up a hill because no one's come around and shoveled it. Yeah, we do need to make sure that we have our major our major streets done, but we also have, like, there's times where I'll see a snow truck driving around and he's not pushing snow. Like, let's get there. Even if you're just doing a U-turn on the street and it's a residential, put it down. Like, let's shovel it out. And I've heard people want to put private contractors in, and I've heard HOA charge it. But the thing is what happens if that private contractor doesn't come in time and then the city comes around and starts issuing tickets? So what we're seeing, it's not an easy solution, but we just need to sort of change our mindset on let's try and make things work. And if you're in the machine, you're pushing snow. And
totally understand where you're coming from. You said that you wouldn't want private contractors there, but I'm wondering, can you see any other services that you might want to see contracting out or private contractors? Things like operating golf courses or garbage collection. Those have been a couple of the things proposed. How do you see it?
I think, I don't mind doing the pilot projects, because I do want to chat. I think we have to be cautious, because I don't like seeing people take the lowest bidder and then suddenly get hit with all these extra add-ons that weren't in part of the contract that was negotiated. And so again, but the other side of the coin is, like we discussed earlier, is living wages. If we're going with the lower, privatizing out, how much are those employees getting paid? So are they able to afford the house that they have here? Are they able to afford taxes? So we have to kind of balance that. If we keep driving down to the lowest common denominator, we're also driving wages down. And so then you also drive people out of your city. So we have to try and make sure that we can attract a functioning system that is going to pay a living wage so that people can actually live and work and play. And I'm going to keep going back to that, live, work, play, because you have to be compensated for your work, for your knowledge. And I don't like seeing that we're eroding the workforce in that way.
Okay, let's talk about sort of the other three major sources of spending for the operating budget: the police, fire, and the EMS dispatch, which was a bit of a dispute. But let's start with police, because there was they called it a defund police movement, and the notion was to take a certain portion of the police budget, put it towards other types of social services to help with mental health calls and addiction calls. Do you support that approach?
I think it's an interesting idea to start. We need to unpack it. Like, if we're going to say we don't like the term defund the police, but what about reallocation of what our resources are? I guarantee you I can talk to frontline police officers that will get a radio call and go, what the heck am I doing responding to this? Or the fact that in 2017, when I talked to some of the police officers about how they have to go on hold for hours at a time to file reports, I'm like, that system's broken. And I had a story that was told me where they were on hold for over an hour, had to start performing CPR, and then they got hung up on it and had to start on hold again. So there are inefficiencies that because we're afraid to talk about defunding the police, we're actually just paying for an inefficient system. And so it really needs to be a partnership about where our police force burnt out. Are they the right, do they even feel they have the tools or the right mindset to go respond to those things? Like, even if we're to talk fender benders, do we really need to pay a police officer to go push some paper? It's like we can put up the cones, we have the tow company there, they're visible, but is it the police officer need to be there for that? Is there a more pressing call that's being neglected? Because I also saw over the years the call sheet that a police officer had to respond to, and the wait times are astronomical because there's petty calls that they didn't even need to really be responding to. So we have to step back and stop thinking about it as defunding, but really taking a look at what they do and what they would need to do.
Do you apply that same kind of thinking to fire? Because I noticed in the dispute about EMS, we found out that fire was responding about 50% of the time, I think, to medical calls. And maybe, maybe that's appropriate because many of them are cross-trained, but maybe that's also part of the reason we don't have enough resources to ensure that there are fire halls, for instance, in your communities. So is there a different approach we need to take to fire as well?
Well, yeah, you have to look at it. Even the opiate response. We're sending call cars from the fire department to and I hate the term opiate crisis. It's a fentanyl. It's a toxic drug supply. So like we're getting terms convoluted here when we're starting to unpack what we're talking when it comes to emergency response. But yeah, the fire hall and the fire department, there are calls that they shouldn't be responding to, and they're putting themselves in jeopardy for something that really needs to be looked at. And we do, and sort of ties into how 911 works. Like, they're the ones that gets the first call. They triage what it is and decide who goes out to it. And so if we don't have enough ambulances to respond, we're backstopping it because someone's life's at risk. So if we don't, and because EMS is a provincial jurisdiction and we're not partnering together, unfortunately, we have to fill we pay more because we have to put the fire or the police officer out there to respond. And so it really needs to be looked at how we're going to do it. And I don't think centralizing 911 is a smart thing to do, because there will be lives lost. There will be missed calls. And you even look at how someone in a panic, stressful state calling 911, they might not even know where they are, like what street they are, and they're just trying to describe it. So you kind of need that local knowledge of the 911 dispatcher for someone who is not thinking clearly. They either are somewhere on the street and someone's unconscious in front of them and they're panicked. So by centralizing it, if you're calling I don't even know where they're going to locate Edmonton, they're not going to know our streets. So you're not going to be able to describe a landmark and them to understand where you are and get resources there fast enough.
All right. Let me ask you a question on a different topic, which is about the referenda that that were proposed. One for reducing speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. The council decided to make that decision themselves and not put it to the people. The other one was the issue of fluoride, which is going to the people. So give me your basic sense of referenda versus when a council member should make decisions on behalf of their constituents.
Well, I kind of think, what are we paying counselors for? Like, you're supposed to do town halls. You're supposed to kind of have the answer by working with your community, because it's not cheap either to go to the community and do a referendum. Mm-hmm. Like it's I'm not going to do my job. I'm not going to go door knocking to ask about these hot topics that are coming across my desk that I know are going to be coming across my desk. So I am absolving myself of making the decision. You guys get to vote on it. But then we also have misinformation campaigns. Like when we talk fluoride, hey guys, fluoride's already in our water. It's at what level do we want to maintain it? You can pull a water report, you can see it's there. And then so it's and speed limits. I think when we see things as simple as lower the speed limit, no, how enforceable is it? How often do I see a police officer driving around my community ready to catch that speeder? Not very often. So it's like, now we're spending more money to replace signs. It's like, it really needs to be looked at. Is there ways to better develop streets and roads when we're first making our communities that will automatically slow someone down? So I'm sick and tired of hearing simple solutions to complex problems, because we do need to look deeper than what's being told to us as something as a simple solution.
All right, I'm going to end with public art, because there have been a few black eyes the city has had with some public art that did not have public support. What do you think about the policy, and do you think it should change?
I think arts is definitely an important part of our city. We definitely lack it. We've made some pretty bad choices when it comes to public art. And when we look at it only as a budget item, we're going to continue to get it. I do like that we're trying to put the arts community in charge of it, because they're going to have a different take. And I think cities that do that end up having a more diverse and respected art scene than just someone sitting on a committee that really doesn't care about art or doesn't see the value in it. So if someone values it and values the experience of art and art galleries, they're going to make a better decision than what we're seeing. And it does provide an opportunity for our city to stop debating bad art and start experiencing and enjoying what art can bring to a city.
All right, let me ask one last question. And this is the balance between the role you play representing your constituents and also your fiduciary responsibility to take care of the city as a whole. What would you do if the administration was recommending something that they said was the best decision for the city of Calgary, but your constituents were opposed? What side would you fall on that?
Well, I would be voicing it. Like, I'm here to speak up for the needs of my community. I'm here to make sure that we're not suddenly surprised by something that's coming across the desk. Like, again, we have technology that's not being utilized to connect with people, and we're putting up roadblocks rather than finding solutions to hear our community, to meet their needs, and think outside of the box. And as long as we continue to go, that we can't do that because that's how it's always been done, we'll never move forward. We'll never find ways to actually address current problems that we've been arguing about year after year after year, because we're stuck in the problem. It's time to start, and like I said, I've said time and time again, is I'm the vessel for the community. I may not live the problem that people are experiencing when in Calgary, day in and day out, but those that experience the problem are also the people with the solution, because they'll look at it and go, why do I have to put up with this when all they have to do is X, Y, and Z? And so I'm here to listen, and I want to listen to both sides of the story, because there'll be threads that will connect. And so as much as we think we're different or polarized, I can go and hear, and we can all, if we stopped and started listening, we would hear that there's a commonality of solution that would at least move us a step in the right direction. I'm not saying it's going to solve it 100% out of the gates, but it will take us in a step us in the direction that will hopefully start to bring clarity to a long-term solution. And that's all I'm looking to do.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
You got it. And that is your Ward 2 Council candidate, Jennifer Wyness.